My name is Peter Beshar. I'm the General Counsel of Marsh McLennan. Myself and our colleagues in the in-house department tend to be more generalists. And so you're trying to find those areas where you really need to plug into that expertise. So it tends to be large-scale M&A transactions, large-scale litigations. And the more that the outside advisors can try to understand the nuance of the business and help educate us so we can take on more and more responsibility for a middle-sized M&A or a litigation that may not pose the same degree of severity, and get the team in a place where they can really manage it themselves. I think aspirationally that's the place that we're trying to drive the department. A substantial number. It used to be on the order of 400. We've done a convergence project to try to bring that down to a more rational size. But around the world, in 130 countries, the number is probably on the order of between 200, about 200. Typically, we'll ask around and say, who does quality work in this area? And then invite 3 or 4 firms to come in, make a pitch. And my advice in that setting is to try to invest some energy into the pitch so that you really have tried to understand what the intellectual property, the product that we're trying to patent, or the privacy issue that we're grappling with at that particular time, so we can really begin to get a sense of the way that you'll approach the issue for us. I've found that law firm marketing is actually critical. That when we are sitting down with 3 or 4 firms to consider a significant new matter, it really does break down that half of the firms invest a tremendous amount of energy into it, and half of the firms give you a relatively pro forma, pre-packaged response. So those firms and those marketing departments that really try to say, okay, Marsh McLennan is in the insurance broking industry, it is in the consulting industry. Here are a list of prior representations that we've done in kind of similar professional services spaces or in a similar industry, and then trying to really put some substantive energy into the legal analysis based on the facts that you know. What we've described the transaction to be, or a particular complaint that's filed, or some challenge that we're facing, put together a thought piece that reflects 5, 10 pages of analysis of the way in which you would approach that. And I think that's a real divide. And as you can imagine, we gravitate very much towards the people who are essentially doing this on the come and investing the energy into the relationship. There are a lot of meetings in a corporate existence. We tend to get into the office earlier than law firm partners tend to do, for example. Most corporate days start somewhere between 7:30 and 8. And then literally, you're in a series of meetings, probably a dozen during the course of the day. And so your day is structured quite differently. You don't have typically 2 or 3 hours to really delve into a specific issue. So that when folks are trying to reach out to be aware of the day, for example, so that an invitation to a fancy lunch is not terribly compelling when you're trying to figure out how to meet your obligations to your colleagues. Breakfast, by contrast, really before the start of the day, for me personally, works quite effectively. Sending a cold email is not terribly impactful to me. But by contrast, if you write a letter to me, 1 or 2 pages, and say, this is some development that's gone on in the law, and I thought you, Peter, might be interested in trying to have a better understanding of it. I stick that in my briefcase at the end of the day, and you read it, and you try to get a little bit smarter. And one of the challenges for somebody like myself is that literally you're asked to weigh in on issues that range really quite widely. And I don't have training in probably half of the areas that I'm asked to weigh in on. So if a law firm partner or somebody in the broader community takes the effort to try to educate me in some area that is topical, take cybersecurity or privacy right now, I'm really appreciative of that. I think the key issue on relationships between law firms and the corporation is to just try to figure out how to align the interests. For the law firms to reflect that they have actually invested time and energy into the relationship. And you can do that by reading analyst reports and the trade press in particular. When I was at Gibson Dunn, I didn't have a good enough appreciation of how much relevant information you can get about how the company is positioned and how it's progressing. And so kind of make an effort there. The structure of a corporation. Before I came to Marsh Mac, I didn't know what a matrix was. I didn't really know what margin meant. I didn't truly know what the treasurer's role was within the corporation. But those are pretty integral aspects of what it means to operate effectively inside of the walls of a corporation. Are there? I'm not convinced. I mean, in the past several years, there's been an explosion of new laws and an intensification of the regulatory enforcement environment. And so in many ways, certainly within the regulatory and legal world, the need for sophisticated legal advice, in my judgment, has increased, not decreased. And M&A activity now increasingly seems like it is accelerating, particularly in the United States. So we have a decent number now of alternative fee arrangements in which it's essentially some sort of a reduction on the hourly rate. But then in return, if you get a really great result, you actually get a premium over your hourly rate, because that's the type of incentives that we want to try to create. Our business leaders quite enjoy it. If you say that, listen, if we get this case dismissed, or if we execute this transaction within some defined period of time that is consistent with what their goals are, that the law firm wins in that process, that is just fine. We had a complex matter that involved some of the senior people in the organization, and we went to a law firm and we said we would really like to get this case dismissed without discovery, and we will pay you a sizable premium if you can figure out how to get that done. And the lawyerly work on the case was just outstanding, and when it got dismissed, we paid them a premium, and we're happy to do so. One vantage point that I have is I think there should be respect in both directions between the law firm and the in-house legal department. From my vantage point, simply paying your bill is not an acknowledgement of great service having been done. So at the end of the year, the team assembles a list, for example, of probably the 10 lawyers who have provided really outstanding legal advice to Marsh Mac during the course of the year, and then I just personally call those people to say, as a former partner, I understand how hard you've been working to try to advance our interest, to make us look good in the legal department, to help us achieve our objectives, and I just want to express my appreciation to you. And just that from every aspect, how do you create the vibe between these two institutions that in fact our interests are really aligned? As a former partner, if I end up in some sort of an alternative fee arrangement, I'm never going to try to really disadvantage the firm. If there's something that doesn't work out, we will try to adjust it in a fair way, whether it's on a future matter or the like. So really to just come in it with that spirit of partnership, that's the holy grail that we're all reaching for. So not infrequently, the advice that we get are longer memos, and they're fascinating and they're wonderful pieces of work, but they're not necessarily that effective to the manner that we actually work within the corporation. So really trying to have executive summaries and say, here are the 2 or 3 most salient pieces of advice that we are trying to convey to you so that you can really understand that and advise your business leaders accordingly. So this is a significant issue for public corporations right now, and therefore it has to be a significant issue for law firms as well. So are your systems as sophisticated as they should be? Do you have what's called 2-factor authentication for your lawyers to sign on remotely when they're not actually in the office to make sure that our data that is sitting with you is in fact given adequate protection? I think that's a very significant issue right now for law firms. There's a little bit of a perception that the really talented people go to the law firms and the less talented people go to the internal legal departments. And if that was ever true, I don't believe it's true now. That from my experience here, having had the privilege of working with 150 colleagues over the past decade, the quality of the lawyers here at Marsh McLennan, and I suspect at many legal departments, in corporations is every bit as strong as the quality at the large law firms. The part of the job that I really enjoy the most is just the sheer variety of it. That I used to be fairly deep in an area that I really knew, and I was probably on solid ground 80% of the time. I knew the way a situation would likely unfold because I had experience on it. In this job, I'm on solid ground probably about 30% of the time. And the balance of the time, you're trying to get good advice, you're trying to use your judgment in a somewhat truncated time frame and deliver good advice, sometimes on the spot.